Well, Mr. Speaker,
I call the Honourable Minister.
I think I heard
Bill
a reference
English.
to. I think I heard in that speech a reference to a piece of legislation which, quote, strikes at the heart of democracy. Now, you would think that if this piece of legislation, which we're debating for the, who knows, fifth or sixth time in this Parliament, struck at the heart of democracy, you'd think the Leader of the Opposition could tell us how. But he didn't. In fact, he pointed out that he needed a third reading speech from the Prime Minister to understand the bill and show what was in it. And, Mr. Speaker, that is negligent of his duty as the Leader of the Opposition.
Order.
Because uniquely among issues a government deals with, security issues are ones in which the Leader of the Opposition participates.
That's right.
He participates. He is briefed, not on every issue, but on anything that matters, actually. And he ought to know what is in this legislation before he gets to the Prime Minister's third reading speech at 4 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon after 12 months of debate about this legislation. And, Mr. Speaker, that's what we have heard from the opposition. What we've heard is a whole lot of leftover, half-warmed rhetoric about democratic rights and none of the attention to the detail and the law and the balance that this issue deserves. They simply have not contributed at all to settling the issues which they say are so important. And that makes some of us question their intent on this piece of legislation. You see, what this debate, which has been so shallow, has done is it's told us more about the state of the Labor and the Green Party than about securities law. And securities law, of course, is a bit complicated. That's why we're here, because the Labor Party got it wrong 10 years ago. They got it wrong. We voted for it. We voted for it. Yes, we did. And I think that's exactly the point. We voted for it because that regime was better than the one that was there before. There was a late change made to it, which did not suit us politically, but we supported it because we believed that better securities law was important, security and intelligence law was important for New Zealand. What did this Labor Party do? They sat round in their student politics common room discussion and said, why don't we try and score some political points? And now they've learned a harsh lesson. The Greens are much better at scoring political points. The Greens believe there are no threats to New Zealand's national security. They believe that terrorism is a figment of the capitalist imagination. They are consistent. They are consistent. And they've scored their political points. All the political benefit of opposing this legislation has gone to the Greens. And the Labor Party have deserted, for the first time in a generation, their long-standing role as trusted stewards of security and intelligence issues in the New Zealand Parliament. As the days go by, we become more appreciative of the balancing and sensible impact that people like Dr. Michael Cullen had on that Labor Party, and to her credit on this issue, Helen Clark, the Right Honourable Helen Clark, who in her whole career, and I've seen it unfold for 25 years, was always strong and clear on these security issues. The Labor Party have shown they are unsuitable to be a trusted government on this issue. Not because they raised some issues, but because they showed a complete inability to deal with and resolve those issues. That's what was required here. We could have had an in-depth, informed debate about the details of this legislation that would improve it, and we got that from Peter Dunn, the man who'd been on the sharp end of privacy issues. We got it from Peter Dunn, made suggestions that illustrated he understood the rules, understood the threats, understood the seriousness of the issues, and the government adopted a number of those suggestions because they were sensible. And, Mr Speaker, this piece of legislation was described in detail by the Prime Minister in a way that our political opponents have made sure the public did not understand. It's more cohesive legislation. There's much more transparency. Well, the Human Rights Commission didn't read it either. The Human Rights Commission didn't read the legislation. More cohesive legislation, more transparency and more accountability. It's pretty simple, Mr Speaker. There's no activity can be conducted under this legislation without a warrant. No activity without a warrant. Second, there can be no warrant without scrutiny of that warrant. You can't just issue it, it's got to be scrutinised. Thirdly, there can be no scrutiny of that issued warrant without independence. That is independent from the people who signed the warrant. And that is the core of this bill, and nothing we have heard from the Labor Party today makes one single suggestion about any change to that legislation that improves the balance. What they've taken, they've taken the position of someone who has no idea what they're doing. We'll have a review. We'll have a review. We'll talk to everybody. This, the Labor Party, who have intimately been involved with New Zealand security and intelligence issues since the day they became a political party, and in recent years fully briefed in government and in opposition, as they did to us, and it comes to rewriting the law with a whole lot of public interest in it, and they've got nothing to say. Nothing. And that is because they chose the shallow, easy, short-term political point scoring on which the Greens have not just outpointed them, they've knocked them out. Not just outpointed them, they've knocked them out. And, Mr Speaker, I have to say that has been a disappointment, a real disappointment. And it's possible that because the Labor Party have given up that role as a responsible leading political party, that this legislation, it's possible, could have been better. Could have been better, but they couldn't be bothered because they listened to Grant Robinson, who said to his leader who has decent and sound instincts on this stuff, they said to him, no, take the shortcut, get the political points scored. Well, Russell Norman dealt to that strategy. So, Mr Speaker, we probably won't have to do security and intelligence legislation for a while because this bill is much better than the last one, and the last one was better than what existed before it, the one passed by Helen Clark. Before that, the GCSB had no legal framework whatsoever, and she rightly thought that's a bit much. There needs to be some framework. We've now intensified that framework in terms of accountability, cohesion and transparency. And, Mr Speaker, that is why the National Party stands behind this legislation. We are taking the responsible act of a government who has been entrusted with the security of New Zealanders. We've improved the legislation. More people can see what's happening. That's good. And, Mr Speaker, it's a bill that will stand the test of time. And you know what I think? I think if the Labor Party ever got to be government and did a review, this is what would come out at the end of it. I just wish they could have taken the bother to think it through this time and contribute to the debate, but they didn't.
Mr Speaker,